What if I told you that the deepest despair and the highest enlightenment are not opposites, but two sides of the same journey? That what feels like your breaking point could actually be the beginning of your awakening. Society tells us that depression is a condition to be treated, suppressed, or feared. But what if it's something else entirely? What if the darkness you are experiencing is not a failure, but a transformation? For centuries, mystics, sages, and spiritual teachers have spoken of a profound existential crisis that often comes before enlightenment, a process eerily similar to what we call depression today. In this video, we're going to explore this connection, drawing from the insights of Alan Watts, Eckhart Tolle, and other great minds. We'll dive deep into the dark night of the soul, a mysterious and often painful initiation that strips away the illusions of the self, forcing one to confront the ultimate truth. Could it be that depression and enlightenment are two different perspectives of the same experience? Stay with me until the end of this video, because the answer may change the way you see everything. Depression and enlightenment, two seemingly opposite ends of human experience, yet upon deeper reflection, they may not be so different after all. What if the darkness we call depression is actually a necessary passage, a gateway to something far beyond suffering? What if, in the unraveling of the self, we find the very thing we have been searching for: freedom? Alan Watts often spoke of the paradox of suffering and liberation. He pointed out that many spiritual seekers, including the Buddha himself, first encountered deep dissatisfaction with the world before their awakening. He said, the desire for security and the feeling of insecurity are the same thing. To hold your breath is to lose your breath. Depression, too, is a state of existential suffocation where the false self, the ego, holds on to an identity that is crumbling, resisting the inevitable transformation. Eckhart Tolle, in The Power of Now, describes depression as an intensified identification with the mind story's painful narratives that we mistake for reality. He says, what a caterpillar calls the end of the world, we call a butterfly. This is the key. Depression often feels like death because, in many ways, it is. It is the death of an identity, a perspective, a conditioned way of existing. But if we surrender to this process, it can lead to an awakening. The journey through darkness, the first stage of depression, is disillusionment, the feeling that something is fundamentally wrong. The world loses its color, and things that once held meaning now seem empty. This is where the ego starts to panic. It clings to what is familiar, resisting the inevitable breakdown. In enlightenment, this is the moment of realizing that the self we constructed is an illusion. The structures we once relied on, whether societal beliefs, relationships, or even personal ambitions, begin to break down. It is the beginning of seeing through the illusion. The second stage is resistance. The mind fights against the emptiness, trying to restore a sense of normalcy. Depression feeds on this resistance, trapping us in cycles of despair. But spiritual teachers tell us that resistance to reality is the root of suffering. The more we fight against what is, the more pain we experience. Alan Watts put it beautifully when he said, to resist change, to try to cling to life, is like holding your breath. If you persist, you kill yourself. The ego fights to preserve itself, but it is this very struggle that deepens the suffering. Then comes surrender, a stage that can feel like rock bottom. The illusion of control dissolves, and one either falls into complete despair or begins to let go. This is the turning point. In enlightenment, surrender is the beginning of true freedom. Tolle emphasizes that when we stop identifying with our thoughts and emotions, we create space for something deeper, the presence beneath the suffering. Surrender is not giving up. It is stepping into a greater intelligence, an awareness that has always been there beneath the noise of the mind. The next stage is transformation. Something profound happens when we stop resisting. Depression and enlightenment both lead to an emptiness, but the difference is whether we fear it or embrace it. If depression is forced upon us, enlightenment is the conscious acceptance of it. When we stop clinging to our stories, what remains is awareness itself, pure consciousness beyond suffering. The Zen master Huang Po said, "To awaken suddenly to the fact that your own mind is Buddha, to realize your identity with it, is to see into your own nature and become a Buddha." This realization, though seemingly simple, changes everything. Depression as a spiritual rite of passage. Many ancient traditions speak of the dark night of the soul, a period of deep suffering and existential crisis that often precedes enlightenment. St. John of the Cross, a Spanish mystic from the 16th century, wrote about this experience as a necessary purification process where the ego is stripped away, leaving behind only the essence of the true self. The dark night of the soul is not merely a metaphor for hardship, it is a profound spiritual event, a deep initiation into higher consciousness. Unlike depression, which often stems from psychological or external factors, the dark night arises from a higher calling. It is the soul's rejection of falsehood, the deep realization that the life one has been living is no longer aligned with truth. This experience can be terrifying because it dismantles everything we once believed to be real. The attachments we held, our sense of identity, our ambitions, our relationships, even our very perception of reality begin to crumble. It is a death, not of the physical body, but of the illusionary self. Spiritual traditions across cultures describe this process. The Sufis call it fana, the annihilation of the self. The Buddhists describe it as the dissolution of the ego, where one recognizes that suffering comes from clinging to illusions. Even Jesus Christ, during his time in the wilderness, faced a form of the dark night temptation, doubt, and the stripping away of worldly desires. Yet, the dark night is not the end. It is a transition. St. John of the Cross wrote that the soul must pass through this emptiness to emerge into divine union, what some call enlightenment, samadhi, or nirvana. The great paradox is that in losing everything, we gain everything. We realize that we were never the mind, the emotions, or the body. We were always the awareness behind it all. Jiddu Krishnamurti once said, "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." Perhaps depression is not always an illness, but a natural response to a world that is out of alignment with truth. Could it be that those who experience the depths of despair are actually being called to something greater, to transcend the illusion entirely? The final step, awakening. Key difference between depression and enlightenment is perspective. Depression is suffering without awareness, while enlightenment is suffering seen through. The pain does not necessarily disappear, but it is no longer personal. It is no longer my suffering, it is simply an experience arising in consciousness. The Persian poet Rumi, who experienced his own dark night of the soul, wrote, "Try not to resist the changes that come your way. Instead, let life live through you. And do not worry that your life is turning upside down. How do you know that the side you are used to is better than the one to come? Perhaps the real question isn't whether depression and enlightenment are the same, but whether we can use one to lead to the other. Because hidden within the darkness, just beyond the mind's grasp, is the light of understanding. And maybe, just maybe, depression is not the enemy, it is the invitation." So, what do you think? Is depression a curse, or is it the doorway to something greater? If you've ever gone through this process, you know that it is no ordinary struggle. It is a deep internal transformation that forces you to question everything you once believed. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the darkness is not here to destroy you, but to show you who you truly are beyond all the illusions. If this video resonated with you, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced what felt like a dark night of the soul? How did it change you? I'd love to hear your journey. And if you found this insight valuable, don't forget to like this video. It really helps spread this message to those who need to hear it. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because we are diving deeper into esoteric wisdom, spirituality, and the hidden truths of existence. Lastly, if you know someone who is struggling right now, someone who feels lost in the darkness, share this video with them. Sometimes all it takes is a shift in perspective to turn suffering into transformation. Until next time, remember, the light you seek is already within you. So flip the switch and see peace, love, and harmony, my friends.